that sometimes you can touch the greatness of Islam by being very close to Muslims, if only you know how to look at them. If you know the secret and not only nurturing the sense of failure, because he was not naive. He was not. And in all what he, Islam at the crossroads and even the road to Mecca and even his tafsir al-Quran is something which shows that this is something which is quite important. He was coming from a closed world, very focused on something that afterward he called the tribal dimension of the Jewish tradition, saying this is a tribe, this is something which is very narrow-minded. This is why he was not feeling good on this, the relationship between one God and one community. And then he went and he met Muslims, ordinary Muslims, and then scholars, and then shuyukh, and even people who were leaders. And he felt that was something which was important, and this is exactly what you said, the universal dimension, the world view of Islam. There is something which is with no limits, something which is beyond that. So he met people, and in their ordinary life, he felt that there is something which was beyond that Islam was giving them something which is a sense of the ummah, but the ummah in something which is no limit to our commitment to human beings, because this is a universal message. It's to go from a community of faith to a community of the community of mankind to the oneness of God, the very essence of Tawheed. So this is something that he repeated, and saying three things about Islam that are important, or two main features. The first thing is what he said in the road to Mecca, is a very simple religion, a natural religion. There is something which is simple and natural in Islam. And exactly what you said about the way he was assessing the Eastern religion. Say, you know what, in Islam, you do not deny or neglect anything which is in you. You are not going to be close to peace by denying, but you are close to peace by using in the right way. So nothing is wrong per se. Your ego is not wrong. Your ego is wrong if there is egocentrism, if the ego is too much. But to start with the ego, because one day you are going to be alone. And when he was quoting, وَكُلُّهُمْ آتِيهِمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ فَرْدًا, one day you are going to be alone. So to know that you are responsible of your own self is central, but do not deny. So this is something which is quite important, the way he used. And between who you are and the way you have to use all the dimensions, there is reason. Reason, no faith without reason. This is the main message that we heard today. The second thing is, as it was important in all what he's saying, is that Islam is a message for the individual and for the community. It's the balanced approach. So it's a simple, balanced religion, and this is something that he experienced from the very beginning. Now, he wasn't naive, and as I said from the beginning, he was looking at the Muslims and understanding that there was a problem. There was a problem between the gap of the message that he started to discover and the way the Muslims were living. This crisis of understanding, this crisis of the project, and some of the Muslims at the highest level, the elite that he met, were blindly imitating the West. And the ordinary Muslims blindly imitating the tradition. So he was between two imitations. And the start of everything is imitation is wrong. Imitation is colonization. You can be colonized by the tradition and you be colonized by the dominant civilization. All the project is free yourself. And the instrument of this freedom, emancipation, is thinking, critical thinking, the intellect, reason, as it was said. And this is why I agree with you that very often, and he came to this at the end of this life, by the way, is anything which has to do with the mystical dimension. He was talking about love, but the way he was talking about this emancipation of the heart, it's not so much present in all this first attempt to summarize his views or to come. It was the mystical dimension, the spiritual dimensions. This was not the first aim. Afterward, which is, by the way, he met Muhammad Iqbal on the political dimension, but Muhammad Iqbal had all the other dimension. And he didn't meet him on that, He met him, of course, but not with this in-depth that we are talking about when it comes to understanding Muhammad Iqbal's thought on this spiritual journey. And for us, it's also very important to look at this. So it's free yourself, it's from any kind of colonization, and then, of course, a very important part for him was the political project. Never forget, he was in a specific period of time. He was dealing with, the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. He was dealing with Arab countries under colonization and the starting point of the Zionist project. It was there. This was the starting point. He was seeing this. So it was really about, resisting the British colonization, everything. And on this, and this is maybe one point where I may disagree, but we can talk about this. I think that El-Afghani dealing with colonization and the British Empire was already having a world view, not Muhammad Abdu. Before, I think that it's very important. Even I think that during the last years of his life, Muhammad Abdu changed a bit his mind by saying, let us start in Egypt, let us have something which is freeing ourselves, which was not at all El-Afghani's thoughts. It was really, it has to be transnational. There is no other way but to have it transnational. So I think that he's somewhere in between, but he's really, and I agree on this, from this tradition. The Salafi of the end of the 19th century, he was coming from there, and then this was mainly a political project saying we have to free ourselves from that dimension. So now this is something which is important for all of us. It's how do we deal with freedom, that we free ourselves, we understand the worldwide dimension of view and of Islam, the worldwide project, the principle, ethics, all this was part of him. But if we have to now try to deconstruct his thought, let me just highlight two dimensions. I don't have time. It's very complex, it's quite interesting, but there is something which is, and this is where the message of the Quran is quite important, in thinking Islam, is how do we deal with the Islamic message. And on this, he was really important, and on this is, he was following in the footsteps of this tradition that we find in Al-Afghani. But not only, by the way, it's not something where, we are speaking about contemporary Islamic, reformists. This is why we start with Al-Afghani is not coming from nowhere. It's coming from a long tradition of people saying, be careful. The legal tradition or the tradition of Islam is sometimes preventing us from coming back to the roots, the text, and understanding the very meaning of the text. This is, this reformist tradition is not something which starts, it was, the revivalist was very deep at that time and has a very important impact because of the political context, which was the end of the Ottoman Empire and also the nation states and colonization. This is why we have it in such a way in the power struggle with the West. But it's not something which is new in the Islamic tradition. But one thing which was quite important for him, he is following in the footsteps of this tradition, saying, let us come back to the text in order to free ourselves from, all the commentaries and everything which was done by our tradition, so coming from human beings. So this free ourselves from a legacy which is preventing us from getting the essence of the message. So it was el-Tajdid, el-Mujaddidun, it was against taqlid. All this is part of him. He was coming from, he understood this, and he met all the people, at that time. He also met the people coming from the reformist tradition. You were talking about Sayyid Qutb, but before, all the tradition of the Muslim Brotherhood and all this, he was in touch with all that. He knew all that at that time, and then Muhammad Iqbal as someone who was saying, on speaking about ijtihad. So it was really to come to the text as something which is freeing ourselves from a very narrow Arab understanding of a universal text. So this was here. And for us, it's really important. For you, it's important. As people living in Asia, it's quite important to understand that the text is much more important than what the human beings are saying about the text. If, of course, you are faithful to the substance of the text. And on this, look at the man. He got a very deep knowledge of the language to be able, with the Arabic language, to say to the Arabs, your culture is problematic sometimes in your understanding of the text. So to get the means to tackle the model. So it's quite important if we want to be serious, and he was very serious. His level of Arabic was, the translation was very good, very deep. So this is something which is important. How do you challenge, authority on the text written in Arabic by the Arabs and their culture, by being able to use the means and to challenge the interpretation? This is one thing. Second thing which is important, we haven't talked about, but that in the book, the message of Islam, he is talking about terminology. And it's something which is the starting point, even before interpreting some of the verses. You may agree or not. On some, I don't. I don't agree with some interpretation, but I think it's very interesting because he's shaking some, traditional understanding. And sometimes there are this dimension of faith and dimension that could be questionable. And this is something which we have to do, is just to read and to ask ourselves. But words, for example. When, for example, he comes to speak about Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu. The first translation that we had is, O you who believe. And look at the way he was putting it, O you who attain to faith. And in fact, he was coming with al-iman, close to al-aman, which is a state of peace. So you are reaching something. So it's coming by challenging the way we were traditionally translating words, and this is very important. And for me, he was the one, when I read the message of the Quran, who was sending me messages, be careful, the starting point of anything which is your own understanding and your own translation to non-Muslims is words, the terminology. And this is why, for example, today, after this long journey, I was very young and I continued, I carried on this. I'm not, for example, when it comes to a very simple word, Islam, I'm not translating Islam by submission, because submission in English doesn't mean Islam in Arabic. It's not the same. The dimension is not the same. So I don't have time to come to this, but I think that terminology, and this is the one, taqwa, God consciousness. Very important. It has nothing to do with fear, and no, it's not only this, it's something which is deeper. He changed, not only for the non-Muslims to understand, but for Muslims even to be careful not to come to very narrow understanding. So terminology matters, translations matters. So I think that here, this is something which is in his book, so important in the message of the Quran. Once again, some of the Muslim scholars didn't agree with some of the translation. That's fine. But at least you come and you compare. You have this critical thinking, which is part of this. So he was saying this to the Muslims: don't imitate the culture, come to the very essence of the message, and terminology matters, and vision, and the whole structure of the message. And at the same time, being able to say to the Muslims, but don't imitate the West. So no imitation, as I said, was crucial on this. Taqlid was problematic, and the critical thinking. And in one text, what he is saying is to be able to come with the ethical message of Islam with the means of the West. And something which is quite important in what you said, and he repeated this: science has no culture, or is not the ownership of a specific, no, it's a human legacy. It's for all of us. Now, what we can add to this is, instead of imitating the West in the model, in the paradigm, in anything which has to do with technology and progress, is to add ethics to the means. So to integrate this. So this was also a relationship that he wanted to the West, which was a critical take, and he was coming from there. He was facing, and he was understanding that there was a failure here, that the dialogue was so important. Having said this, it's quite clear that for him, Islam was an alternative in this relationship with an alternative project that was able to come and to contribute. So the worldview was not only we have a worldview, we have to contribute, we have to challenge the worldview of the West with a worldview with ethics coming from Islam. So it was not only about power, it was about ends. What are the ends? And this is why he's always connecting his project and his political project. And if you go, we don't have time, I'm very sorry, but if you go in all his involvement in Ibn Saud and Sanusiya with Pakistan, it's all about this, is let us have a political project based on ethics, based with a vision about justice, about equality. So he's saying, don't imitate the nation state that we have with the secular system, but if Islam means something in our project, is all about ethics and ends. And he was quite disappointed with what he saw afterward.